Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Bob Stoner. I'm chairman of Livable Buckhead. I'm filling in for Denise Starling, our executive director, who's under the weather today. So I will do the best I can. If you can believe it, this was the last in-person indoor event Livable Buckhead held in 2019. It's been 3 years. So it's appropriate that this is one of the first events we hold in what we hope is our post-COVID world. Thank you for all getting out behind all your Zoom and your cameras and being with us. We've missed having you and putting on a number of events. As hopefully you know, Livable Buckhead is all about working with our partners to advance sustainability initiatives in the community. Today we're presenting 2 awards that directly reflect that mission. They're the Mobility Champion and the Triple Bottom Line Awards. The first award, the Mobility Champion Award, is all about traffic. It recognizes an employer that implements an exemplary commute alternative program that mitigates traffic congestion, reduces emissions, and improves the quality of life for their employees. I'd like to introduce Katie Carhart, Livable Buckhead's Mobility Services Manager, who's going to tell you all about this year's winner. Katie?
Hello, good morning, everyone. I am Katie Gable. I'm with Livable Buckhead, the Mobility Program Services Program Manager there, and I'm very excited today to present QGenda as our 2021 Mobility Champion. So we have partnered with QGenda for about 5 years now, and really helping them implement workplace benefits that have ultimately enhanced their overall employee experience. And their work first began with implementation of our transit program back in 2018, and the decision to cover the cost of transit passes for each employee who chose to give up their parking pass. That was a major win back then. And over the years, QGenda has made a concerted effort to really participate in challenges and promotions that encourage their employees to choose clean commutes, so bike, walk, transit, among others. And that's really involved our parking day events and Buckhead Walks Walk Challenge. And after this crazy pandemic telework pilot that we've all been through, QGenda found that there are some real benefits to telework and decided to implement a formal policy. So now they'll have about 90 employees working remote full-time, about 350 employees working a hybrid schedule, so about 2 days a week at home, and then only a handful that really need to be in the office every single day. And I think a lot of companies are starting to realize that. So with all this programming in place and their involvement in the community volunteer projects with Livable Buckhead, QGenda is making a huge impact on the community and on their employees. Even on Buckhead, congestion and air quality is pretty substantial. Their employees will be taking over 1 million vehicle miles off the road each year, and that's equivalent to about 350 metric tons of CO2 emissions saved. For their commitment to improving the employee experience and their impact on the community, we want to congratulate QGenda for being Livable Buckhead's 2021 Mobility Champion.
Congratulations. Thank you, Katie. All right. And now we'll move on to the second award, the Triple Bottom Line Award. This award is inspired by all things green. It recognizes an organization that has demonstrated success in the development and implementation of initiatives that drive sustainability forward in Buckhead. Michelle Simard, our Sustainability Program Manager here at Livable Buckhead, is going to tell you more about this year's winner. Michelle?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Michelle Simard with Livable Buckhead. I'm very happy to introduce you to Mahesh and Smita Patel, the owners of The Shop at Buckhead, the Shell Station convenience store located in the heart of Buckhead on Roswell and Powers Ferry. They worked with their good friend Vinay Bose, who's also here with us today, to find the best ways they could to build a self-sustaining, energy-efficient building for their business. Their goals were both environmental and economic. After all, why not save some money while limiting our natural resources? The Shop at Buckhead's sustainability initiatives include installing solar panels, LED fixtures, energy-efficient appliances, and a rainwater harvesting system. First, let's talk solar. Their entire building is clad with solar panels, including the canopy and roof. To capture maximum solar energy, they installed architectural panels on the south-facing windows with multi-level awnings. Their property produces almost half of its own energy. I'm impressed. But I think my favorite feature of this facility is their rainwater harvesting system. They have a large roof and decided to take advantage of its size by capturing 100% of the water that falls. They capture this water and use it everywhere where potable water isn't needed. Think irrigation and cleaning the lot. They also put into place a soak pit with 32,000-gallon storm traps. They let the excess water percolate into the ground, which replenishes the natural water table and, bonus, allows them to send little to no water from this property into the city's already overburdened stormwater system. For their commitment to driving sustainability forward in the community, congratulations to the Shop at Buckhead for being Livable Buckhead's 2021 Triple Bottom Line Award winner.
All right, congratulations again to the awesome teams at QGenda and the Shop at Buckhead. We really appreciate the work that you are doing for Buckhead, and it's an honor to recognize you today. It is companies and people like you who make a difference in our community, so I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you on behalf of all of us at Livable Buckhead. All right, let's get on to the main program now. I hope everyone's ready to dive into some data and see some charts and graphs. Here we go. All right. Let me begin by introducing Mike Alexander. For those of you who may not know him, Mike has worked with the Atlanta Regional Commission for just over 20 years now, and he's currently the Senior Director of ARC's Center for Livable Communities. Mike's team is responsible for a range of planning and programmatic initiatives, including transportation and mobility, community development, water resources, and leadership development. Whenever you hear about any of these regional issues, Mike and his team likely have their hands all over it. They have also funded several of our own Buckhead planning efforts and infrastructure improvements, including the Buckhead Redefined Master Plan, the development of our special zoning districts, the Buck Shuttle, Peachtree Road, and more. They are a tremendous partner to Livable Buckhead and the Buckhead CID. And most importantly, Mike oversees a fantastic research division, as always, geeking out on data and identifying trends facing the region. And it is the work of that division that you're going to see today. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mike Alexander.
Oh, thank you. So good morning, everyone. We're out. And I was here last time, and it was really exciting because if you're an Atlanta United fan, how many of you are die-hard Atlanta United fan? George Campbell's mom was in the audience, and she was talking her son up. And now who, Jim, is a starter for Atlanta United? George Campbell. So, you know, Buckhead, I love you because I got introduced to George's mom last time I was here. And I couldn't be happier to be here today. Lots of great news, some news that's challenging. But I really want this to be your conversation with me. As Jim knows, I do this a lot. And so I'm going to ask you at times, what are you interested in? And I expect feedback. And we'll go wherever you want to go once I get through some core things that we want to make sure that you understand and know. And as always, at the end of the presentation, I'll put up a QR code. So if I skip a slide, don't worry about it. Seriously. If I don't spend too much time on it, that's okay, because you'll be able to download the deck at the end with your phone and look at it on your leisure, hopefully on a laptop, because it would be a hard read on an iPhone. But that's our critical commitment to you. We want to provide you great information. Lots of custom information about Buckhead as we go forward. So, in the highest level, this is one of my favorite charts. It's a terrifying chart, and it compares recessions, how long it takes in a recession to get back to full employment. And so when you see the lines getting above 0%, that means we're back to full employment. And they're color-coded by the year of a recession. So this red recession is the pandemic recession, and these are national numbers, right? So you can see the Great Recession was absolutely brutal. It took us so long, over 74 months, to get back to full employment. And it's really PTSD for people like me the Great Recession, because we're still feeling the impacts of that in so many ways, and you'll feel that in the information. But this is very much a V recession. We are coming quickly out of it. We turned everything off, and then we turned everything back on, and job growth has been very, very strong. But it sets a context for how this recession looks compared to all the other recessions in modern history. And if you're thinking about what people are thinking about coming out of this recession, coming out of really these lockdowns around the pandemic, they're thinking a lot about remote work. So what we were just talking about, remote work and what it means, and in the big employment centers, people coming back, what that's going to look like over the long term is critical to the ARC, because we think a lot about commuting patterns and congestion, because over the long term we think and plan for the road infrastructure we're going to build to meet that congestion. So telework is here to stay, and that will have a big impact on the pattern long term. How many of you think traffic still feels less than what it was pre-pandemic, right? Some places it does. What I've learned through talking to my favorite restaurant is they don't get a lot of traffic on Mondays and Fridays like they did, but Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays are very good, and that's the Aviva benchmark for me, that a lot of people have changed their pattern of commuting. Day, noon traffic actually is in some places heavier than it was pre-pandemic. So people are thinking about remote work and, of course, labor shortage, and that's probably where we're going to spend most of our time. As always, coming out of this recession, in Metro Atlanta, if you're a low income and often cases a middle income worker, you need to know that your margins are very, very lean at the household level. So more than a quarter of people couldn't pay cash for a $400 emergency. So when I talk about all the job growth and all of the economic growth we're experiencing, I always like to reset to say that, is it really benefiting everyone, and how are households actually doing? And given the recent trends in inflation, this is critical. So national numbers aside, Metro Atlanta is already back to employment levels that are greater now than they were pre-pandemic. So we shut down generally less. We recovered faster than some of the other big metros. And this is where I need you to smile back at me, right? Because we are really in a net positive place for jobs, and jobs matter. That number is so critical to our understanding of how we're doing. And so we're outpacing the United States, right? And if you look at that, I don't know why it's bleeding over on the screen. I get really, okay, yeah, you can see it. The blue line's a little bit higher than the US. And if you compare us to other metros, the big metros that really went into lockdown, they're still way behind. Now this data is a little bit old, but it gives you the trend pattern at the metro area level. Austin, guess where we're going for our annual Link elected officials regional leaders trip is to Austin, because I'm tired of looking at charts like this. I wanted to make sure I understand what Austin's doing, good, bad, and ugly, because on a lot of economic dashboards about the US, Austin is almost always number one. And if you can't feel it, I'm a very competitive person. I want Metro Atlanta to be as strong as possible. I don't want it to be at the expense of anyone else, but I want to make sure we're as far over to the left as we possibly can be. So we're studying Austin. And you look at the sector level change, and Jim and I have talked about this in the past, information, right? And it used to be you'd think about information as like CNN, right? And information from Metro Atlanta, our location quotient, everybody know what a location quotient is? If you have a higher share of those jobs, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, than the national average, that location quotient would be higher than 1. So it's a good way to see how diverse your economy is, how strong it is. Our location quotient for information has been strong, but we haven't been adding, over the long term, much of those jobs. Now we are. That's a great thing. That's a great thing. And so when I show you the Buckhead data, I want that in the back of your mind. And of course, professional business services, relatively strong. Education and health, coming out of the pandemic, obviously we're trying to hire people, find people to work in education, especially early childhood care, which is a critical issue for me. And of course, education is always going to be, I think, over the long term, a challenge for us to find enough people to fill those positions, right? But other services are still down. And then again, we're always going to compare ourselves to other metros. And this is percentage change, because during the pandemic, the sector that was strongest was warehouse warehousing and materials, goods, movement, however you want to call it, but people working in the e-commerce centers, we all know this, right? Amazon, a couple years ago, Amazon was adding to their base total of total space 50% a year. So they are expanding in ways that really it's hard for me even to scale the magnitude of how much Amazon is building to meet the demand. And so, of course, they've been raising their base pay rates, and they're up to close, I think, $20 an hour now for those positions. So while you see that in yellow, transportation, warehouse, and utilities, that has been a big sector of change for us. But here's where the challenges start. I mean, year over year in December, not October, we were up on inflation 9.8% as a metro. And of course, if you're looking at that, it's driven by motor fuel. We are a place built on movement. The airport, warehousing and distribution, people meeting up on Friday nights talking about their commute home, right? So when motor fuel prices go up, it really impacts Metro Atlanta very specifically. But I like to keep the long view because my daughter is now majoring in economics, and she's always coming at me about the money supply, which as a dad you can't love anymore. So I'm very happy that she'll call me and ask me questions about economics and then tell me how wrong I am, which is a lot of fun. But so I was like, well, you know, slow your roll, Lindsay. Over the long term, if you look at index gas prices, we're nowhere near record levels. But when you get used to these unbelievably low prices, when they go up, everybody feels that pain so directly, right? And it's obviously going to impact our low-income workers the most. And then this is one of my favorite slides because you just got everything on it, right? But there's two simple points. The yellow line, there are more job openings now, right, than there really in this data set going back over 20 years. We're at near record level job openings. Lots of opportunity, right? And of course, the light blue line is the quit rate. And so I want you to really specifically scroll over and see that the quit rate is at record levels too. So when you hear everybody talking about the great resignation, man, it couldn't be more true, right? And so lots of people looking to really upgrade, skill up, change to get and find better work. And it's impacting our low wage sectors the most, like a hospitality, the food service industry, where those are the lowest wage jobs, right? Well, you're looking at this economy going, maybe I can find something better. Maybe I can find something better. And then you start to pull up to go to small businesses where you might be really struggling to find people for employment, right? And then on top of that, the recent news is, well, because of fluctuating demand, if you do go into that work, well, you're maybe not getting the hours you want to begin with. And so there's a lot of nuance and complexity built into how the U.S. economy is really performing. But the short story, you know, is that finally wages have started to pick up because there really is that much demand, right? And some people were saying, well, why aren't people going back to work during the pandemic? But if you look at the employment rates prior to the pandemic, we were already in a tight labor market, and that's only going to continue. Right? And the service industry, of course, like I just explained, is really those sectors where we're seeing the biggest wage increases. Information actually for Metro Atlanta, wages didn't go up that much, which is something that when we built this chart, we were kind of like, really? But that's kind of the nuance of the story, and I hope you look at this in more detail. And then you have to focus on this slide on real average hourly earnings, real. So that's taking into effect inflation. So if you're looking back from 2018, man, everything, especially at the start of the pandemic, wages really started to go up. But if you look at Atlanta and that red line, and we're starting to see that trend before the inflationary impacts really hit us, wages were already going down, which is a little hard to bear. And then, of course, if you're thinking and putting inflation into this calculation, then real wages, you're really watching inflation erode those salary and those wage increases. And that's really the challenge I would want you to understand that, we're watching motor fuel prices very closely for Metro Atlanta because it's such a big impact, such a big input into especially our low and middle income households, right? And I won't get to it today. Historically, we've been an affordable housing place, right? We're not so much anymore. But if you put in housing costs and you put in transportation costs, historically, then Metro Atlanta becomes really pretty expensive, like top 7 metro for middle income households when you put those two together. And that's something you've always got to understand about our economy. So to see this is particularly troubling. All right, let's talk. You want to talk about housing, I'm sure, right? Okay. All right, so I put this together just to say, like, let's get some top line points that I think are critical, right? Because there's one thing that I don't think gets said enough. Because of these housing price increases, a lot of us are sitting on a lot more equity than we had prior to this run-up in housing. The U.S. housing market has doubled in value since the start of the Great Recession. And I'm going to ask you to process that. That's an incredible economic statistic, right? And that's going to be a lot of potential future capital and energy that gets put back into the economy in new business, small startups, and as people leverage that equity. So in net, you'd want to say that that's a positive, right? But most of that run up is in the most expensive homes. So I'm just trying to get you to see the nuances on this. And of course, my talking point about housing is I want you to remember the Century 21 commercials for all us Gen Xers that were waiting on Baba Black Sheep to come back on, where they're driving around in the fancy gold car looking at houses. Think of the pace of that. And then the Super Bowl, Redfin. Everybody know Redfin? Redfin put up a commercial. Our databases update every 5 minutes. You got to be in to win. Contrast those two ideas of how the American housing market is performing, right? And so much is going to get talked about the way those big databases are impacting the way we buy and sell homes over the next couple years. What did Zillow start doing? Yeah, and to be honest with you, that's Fright Fest for Mike Alexander. How does the person with Century 21 going to look at houses compete against server farms running queries to make quick decisions about who's most likely to take an offer on a house and what that price point should be? And AI's running to send them offers, right? Not humans, and then to buy up the house and flip it. Now, their pricing models were really bad. They admitted it. They had to write off a ton of money. But it's just the start. Yes. But again, one of the things you're going to hear us talking about is institutional investment in single-family housing. Like they built a model where they can buy homes in large numbers and rent them. So even those companies are going to be looking at the market in a much faster way to figure out where they can be at price points. And they will compete against young households for housing, right? And so the critical thing is to recognize we just haven't been building enough housing. And if anybody wants to disagree, meet me after. Let's bang it out. We're really still at about half the rate of pre-recession, and of course that is a very big challenge for us. And then this is a pattern chart. And I figured this out on YouTube, actually. I watched a video of a guy talking about spring sales. And so, you know, what happens at Christmas every year? People take their houses off the market, right? And then in spring, you relist your house, and that's kind of the peak period of sales. And this is a lot. If you were to go back through time, you could probably go back 70 years and see those curves. But what happened in really the start of the pandemic, the line has just continued to go down. The cycle is broken. And so when we say the for sale inventory is at all-time lows, we're not kidding. And I don't see any way out of it. And I've got a bunch of Buckhead data about this too. So of course, since 2012, our housing prices have doubled here in Metro Atlanta, period. And if you look at the rental side, the last 5 years, the rental rate has gone up 41%. So think about those relatively small wage increases. If your wages are going up 6%, where are you going to be? Fuel prices have gone up, your rent is going up dramatically, and you're not keeping up. And that's what I have to use the word, you're eroding at the household level on income. And so this is the slide I found to really get at this point. This is housing starts per million people by decade. So, you're looking at these, the population has grown, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and you look at the 2010s, that rate of housing starts was about half. So when I say we're still feeling the impact of the Great Recession, that's it. I mean, burn this one into your brain. And so at Atlanta Regional Commission, Community Foundation, every partner we have, we're talking about housing. You'll hear the phrase affordable housing. Working with our local governments to understand what are our strategies to put more housing into Metro Atlanta to meet really the growth we're already experiencing. All right, so real quickly, consumer spending is up in a very, very strong way. If you're a small business, hopefully you're benefiting from that. Not to say you're a small business, you could be a huge business. But generally speaking, but this is actually going to have to be updated because the most recent open table data, how many of you booked through Open Table? Okay, they actually published their data, and finally these numbers at the national level are up pre-pandemic in the number of bookings. And this is where big data is so fascinating to me that I'm looking at every time you reserve a table at a restaurant here in Atlanta to see in aggregate how that's changed. So we weren't spending in restaurants, but this trend as we're coming back is going to be very, very strong. And restaurants are struggling to find people to do work. I mean, you'll hear this over and over again. Some of the big restaurant companies still have restaurants shuttered because they just don't think they have the people to open the restaurants. Can't find managers, right? So this is how tight the labor market is. And so what is the labor market looking like? Software developers, right? Software developers. There is an almost unlimited demand in this country for that. And of course, for registered nurses. And I wish my two daughters who are in college would learn to JavaScript program, get a CDL, right, and learn to take care of people. They will be off the Alexander Dole, which we would love. Because I have learned I'm supposed to pay their cell phone bill till they're 25, 26 years old.
I've got insurance.
Oh, I'm going to get car insurance. Man, it's hard being a senior adult. A senior adult. Everybody talks about adulting, millennials adulting. I'm like, what about senior adulting where you realize you were going to have to cover that car insurance?
Yeah, doing it right now.
And, pay the tickets too, as it turns out. All right, not going to spend it. Please, Glenn.
Before you get to Buckhead, so something that I often think about is migration movement that the pandemic has caused from major cities like New York and LA, in addition to what they're talking about is global warming migration, which is people moving away from coasts and from fires and natural disasters. So anyways, I was wondering, I noticed there was no sort of talk about either of those and its impact, but it feels like that could have a huge impact on Atlanta because we're going to have people moving here from those places for those two different reasons. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's on the environmental side, if I'm being frank, when we're thinking about our long-range plans, and that's exactly what we're saying. The only thing that will really impact the trend in a dramatic way over the I'm thinking like 2100, right, is really what climate is going to do, especially in coastal areas. NOAA, if you Google NOAA, not NOAA flooding, but they have put up a climate change tool where you can just hit a slider, number of additional feet of sea level rise. Do NOAA sea level rise. Somebody try to do it now and pull up the website. You will see what that potentially looks like, and it could, climate migration could be over the long term. Glenn, I couldn't be more on that. Do we have anything right now in our baked presentations? No, but it's almost like, and Jim will understand this, an additional scenario we want to run to see what that really looks like, right? Because it's going to be a challenge, right? And the number of, like there's interesting things like the number of times the grid, like the electrical grid has been impacted by weather, has been increasing over time at the national level. And it's a great indicator, like if the weather storms are so severe that the grid goes down, and that's happening in more frequency, well, that's an indicator about what's happening, to speak to Glenn's very thoughtful, policy wonky Glenn question, comment, right? So let's continue that. This is just to show you the area. When you see this data, this is us drawing in the Buckhead TMA. So when we talk about Livable Buckhead and their service area, that's what you're looking at. But again, you see these rates of change, especially from 2010 to 2021. This is commercial data, ESRI data, to show you strong population growth. I know, it's a lot. You're gonna have to look at it later, but we do try to understand this. The white population in Buckhead has grown, right? And that's not true for most geographic areas that I would show you across Metro Atlanta. So that share of white non-Hispanic has held relatively high. So generally less diverse than the rest of the city in the metro area. And that's a question, Jim, that Denise and I talked a lot about in the pre-meeting. So this is actually a critical slide for the people to really focus on this, and you need to look at it in more detail. And so age, and these ages are color-coded across, not up and down. You know, Buckhead is older. The census tract that has the highest share of 65 plus in the region is actually in Buckhead, because you've got a lot of vertical residential senior housing, which is a good thing, right? But it's here in Buckhead, and everybody gets their mind, I think, that's a good thing. Just, leave it at that. It's not a bad thing. I mean, we need great housing for people that are older in this country, right? And so median age, older. And then that said, you got a lot of 20-somethings. And I got dragged into a Friday night here in Buckhead. And I dragged myself out very early. And my best friend from the Marine Corps in college didn't get home till 3:30. I got home at 10:30 because I'm reasonable, just to show you. But Buckhead still feels like Buckhead from my 20s, right? And so there's a lot of questions. Well, Buckhead, I'm like, no, it was kind of crazy. And I saw the crazy and bailed as quick as I could, because I'm 51 years old. That's not for me anymore, right? So there's still this strong 20-something pattern. Of course, very wealthy. I think everybody here understands that. Look at that later. And the housing, these numbers. Just wait for it. Now, this is like literally, look at this and think Mike's saying, hold my beer. It's coming. You got to see the other stuff. And that's why I'm clicking through this. Professional, scientific, and technical services. You know this, but I've got better stuff, and I want to keep clicking quickly. All right. Yeah, Buckhead's, employment's been strong. But this is our core, one of our core things that shows you job postings. It's changed. And so, this is like, go look at this later. It's really kind of fascinating. But top industries, and now we're looking at literally something that I think the way they've rebuilt this tool, and it's hard for you to see it, but you see the gray national average, and that's a line. So they've done something brilliant here. They're giving you the industry jobs in total. So you see that the biggest job total is finance and insurance. But then you see the gray line. I'm sorry to be so specific. That's that national share. That's them reworking location quotient. So you can see Buckhead is, and I'm still going to use this phrase to keep you entertained, off the chains in finance and insurance. So scroll down and then look at the gray lines. Like you actually don't have a high share of healthcare jobs, even though Piedmont did a wonderful job repairing my hip 3 weeks ago. So I'm very happy about Piedmont Main Hospital surgery, the new surgical clinic. It was wonderful. So, but you can absolutely understand your economy in one slide in just a few seconds about really where your core strengths are. Professional, scientific, and technical services, again, so strong, right? Administrative support, I mean, those are really business-oriented jobs. I wish they would change the name of this because it throws people off. You don't have any government jobs, so everybody scroll through real quickly and we'll keep going, but this is brilliant what they've done to help us to explain to everyone how they're doing. And then top occupations like business services, office administrative support, higher shares, so take just a second to scroll through this. And you see those grays past the blue lines, that means you've got a smaller share, right? And then location quotients. Anybody lawyers in here? They're among you, the lawyers up here. That's all I'm saying. And of course, wages are very high. Wages are up more in Buckhead than Georgia or the national average. That's why that gray is above. That's a good thing for y'all, right? But I'm thinking about, everybody else too, but this is good for Buckhead. And then those location quotients. Look at financial services, 2.92. When I see anything about 1.5, I'm like, that's very strong. So 2.92, again, just hits home my point. And then, of course, the top posting industries, you see professional, scientific, and technical services, right, very strong. Software developers, this is City of Atlanta now, City of Atlanta. So we have gotten as a city a ton of wins. And when I was in graduate school, we had to do a case study on a Volkswagen plant in Pennsylvania. And I know you think I'm in the weeds, but the governor ended up saying about that, I wish I'd put a dozen eggs in a basket instead of one big egg in a basket. And so Amazon for me was very critical. We worked hard on the Amazon application behind the scenes. We didn't get it. But now we've got Microsoft coming in. And you hear these wins often very much in Midtown, but we've gotten a lot of great eggs recently that are coming to the city. And that's good for everyone. That is absolutely good for everyone. So I feel better about what's happening now than if we had had the Amazon win. It would have been a very different story, right? So all's well that ends well on that for me. And of course, software is such a critical part of it. And I can't understate how valuable our universities are, all of them, but of course, in particular, Georgia Tech, right? Georgia Tech graduates more engineers than MIT, right? Okay, and it's always important, if you've never seen this, this is like who's coming to work and out. How many of you are familiar with inflow, outflow? Okay, so this is, I always worry, Jim, that I'm showing you stuff you've already seen. But it's probably important to know only 8,000 people live and work in this Buckhead area. And this is why you have Livable Buckhead trying to figure out and help businesses on commuting, because you've got 100,000 people coming in. And you got 32,000 people leaving every day to go to work. And so we're employed residents. People live in Buckhead. Where do they go to work? Mostly to Perimeter or Midtown or downtown. Like, it's good to have a MARTA, heavy rail system, unique in all the Southeast, that provides you such wonderful access to really 2, 3 other huge economic centers. And then where do people come from? And Jim and Denise have thought a lot about this, but you see really from all over, people are coming to work in Buckhead. And so it's critical to think, especially in your service industries, that they're probably not living in Buckhead. Okay, I'm going to explain this one, and then y'all need to look at this later, because this is a Jim and Glenn know Jim Skinner. This is Jim Skinner work. So it's brilliant, but it's hard to read, and I apologize for that. So Buckhead's on the left. See how he puts his 2 arrows? Look to the left for Buckhead. For the whole MSA, 29 counties, you look to the right. And so then it's real small. It says market rent, square footage, right? So you can compare that. And then the vacancy rate. So you get a ton of information about office space built into these slides. So you can see what happened to office space prices in Buckhead, right? Went up to almost $40 a square foot. And you compare that to a San Francisco where asking rents before the pandemic were like $98 a square foot, just for comparison. But again, across the metro, that number was under 29. Declines during the pandemic, and then the forecast going forward, and then the vacancy rate falling to 12%, vacancy rate increasing even before the pandemic and then leveling out in the forecast. So good information for you to have. And then we do it for retail, right? And multifamily. So this is really cool that we can run report and tell you you've got 26,910 multifamily units that are being captured in the CoStar data set and what the vacancy rate looks like. But this is market asking price. So if you're looking at 2020, so we finished 2020, and then look at what happened to rents. So the market asking price for a unit in Buckhead now is $2,000. Again, you got to put that in context. Some of you are like, oh, $2,000. If you make $45,000 a year, you can afford about a $1,250 unit. And so if you're thinking about a place being affordable for your people working in your service jobs, right? And the service workers really aren't making $45,000 a year. That's why we're talking about the challenge of affordable housing. And you can feel that run up in Metro Atlanta. And when you put it all back together, that's that 41% increase in rents over the last 5 years, which just isn't sustainable over the long term for middle income and low income workers. This is the challenge. And I know everybody gets really scared when we talk about affordable housing in their community, but it really is at this critical point now. Jim, I have literally been mentored by Jim Skinner for over 20 years now. Have you ever seen anything like this? It's tough. And again, that's why I keep talking about supply. You got to build more, and then prices start to cascade when you build a lot. And so this is new data. I can't explain it. Don't ask me a question about it. I'm just now starting to learn it. This is market insight data, but I swear you will go down a rabbit hole when you really download this and look at it, right? Because it tells you what your new inventory is by price point for the Buckhead area. And then, of course, Jim Skinner put in an asterisk to tell you what zip code specifically it was. So you have no new inventory in any of these price points. This is Buckhead, right? If we were in a greenfield area, that would be different. If I ran this in a Walton County, it would look very different. Now, there's no inventory under $100,000. In fact, you can't build a house in Metro Atlanta for under $250,000, right? The math is impossible based on lot prices. But so your deficit obviously is very great in those, and that's not going to happen. But even in the higher price points, there's a deficit. All right, let me go one more. And then, of course, if you look at the average price in 30327 now, it's over $1 million. That may or may not seem like a lot to you. It seems like a big number to me. Anytime I use 2 commas, my eyes get bigger, right? Okay, so it's 8:54. How long do I have?
You've got
15.
5, 10 minutes.
Yeah, so I want somebody to say, all right, give us something else that you want to talk about. It could be almost anything. I'm going to scroll through the deck and we'll talk about it. All right.
So many of our workers, healthcare, and other industries, employees are having to move further and further out. They can no longer live in Vinings or Sandy Springs or Dunwoody. They have to live further out. So talk about how that has impacted the labor market and the transportation issue.
Yeah, okay. Hold on. We're clicking, and I really wanted to talk about this. I wish y'all had asked me about this. Anyway, y'all look at this later. Yeah, and let me answer it a different way to Robert McNamara. Do we see new employment centers really starting to happen in the ex-urban areas of this region? No. No, the reality is the Buckheads, the perimeters, our spine that it really is, Fulton County, continues to be so strong. The pattern of movement has changed. Lifting that question up, what's going to happen long term because of telework, because of virtual work? I'm going to give you an anecdotal thing. All right, I was on WAB yesterday, and I was on the breakout room for 25 minutes with the producer. She's in her late 20s. She ended up telling me that she was pregnant. She was looking for a house. She qualified for a home, truthfully, it was about $275,000 a year. What did you think I thought about her chances of getting a home? Yeah, yeah, I mean, and look, I'm going to talk from the heart a second. I was gasping. And then she told me, when she told me she was pregnant, I said, well, have you already put yourself on a waiting list for childcare? And she said, no. I'm like, you got to do that. You got to do that, HI, right? And man, we had a very serious conversation before I went on, and I was like kind of broken up that this is what is happening to young households. She's like, yeah, we don't even know where to look, basically is what she said. We're going to have to look further out. But of course, she wasn't like the millennials saying, we have to be in town. They really want to buy a house because she was very proud that she was ready and had qualified and had gotten cleared for a mortgage. And I got to tell you, I was hurting for her. So if anybody could help young people find housing, it is that critical. And I know that doesn't answer your question exactly, but that her mindset was, no, we really do have to look like way out to have an opportunity. And even then, at that price point, it's going to be so hard. Is that, you know, and you probably all have these stories. It may be your own kids as well, right?
So I think part of the whole discussion on affordable
sorry.
housing is in this conception of, we think of affordable housing as maybe Section 8. The reality is a lot of these younger and also our boomers are all squeezed into the same market. They're all fighting for the same housing, pretty much. And so when it comes to the transportation, the expansion of something like MARTA, but the actual utilization, what are we doing to encourage those people who are working in this area to be able to use that and be able to come in? Because the reality is you're not going to be able to even buy a patch of dirt under $680,000 in our area if we're talking about Buckhead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
That's one of the things that I would like to know. What are we really doing to give those incentives like we did 15 years ago about trying to commute together? I don't know that we're doing anything right now about that.
Livable Buckhead works every day to help match people and the commute patterns. But here's the thing with that. That's an old idea, like commuting in. That's white-collar employment. What about the person that's going to go work in the restaurant that needs to get public transit back at 11:30 at night?
So isn't the lack of rapid transit, mass transit, just as big a hindrance as lack of affordable housing?
And this is what I said yesterday on the radio. Yeah.
Those are three big issues.
You can't think about anything in isolation anymore. You have to think about a household as participating in an economic ecosystem where they need health care they can afford. They need a commute that is literally livable. And we want them to have children because we're below replacement birth level, right? So how are they going to get child care? All of it's wrapped up in this economic story. Oh, sorry, we'll get to it.
Relevant to what was just spoken about, there is going to be an employer-assisted housing study done in Buckhead that Livable Buckhead is leading the charge on. And so during 2022, we're going to be looking at that as a way that we might be able to find something new to be able to help to subsidize the cost of housing for our workforce that can't afford to live here. So that's one thing I wanted to make sure you understood. And then a strategy for addressing, fighting against institutional investment in single-family houses. I've got a son who's 31 years old. He lives in Denver, Colorado. He is ready to buy a house. He has discovered that he cannot do it, so he and a friend are coming in together as a syndicate, and the two of them are going to try to buy a house so that my son can then live in while both of them have an investment. So I don't know about you guys, but I could not have imagined buying a house with a partner when I was growing up, but that's what it's come to.
Yeah. Oh, you were up next, definitely.
You were saying earlier that the like Microsoft coming in, the technology companies coming in is going to be a good thing for us. Why is that a good thing if that's going to ultimately raise the price of housing even more and add to these issues that we're feeling? And we're going to like turn into a San Francisco.
Yeah, and that's why I'm here talking to you about this, that those are good, high-paying jobs. Like if you're looking at GDP and the basic idea of what kind of employment diversity we want to have in our economy, this is basic stuff. You know, you want to attract high-paying jobs because generally the spillover impacts are good. But over the long term, given what's happened and our lack of building housing over this time and the gap in just the number of units, that's a challenge. That's why I say good challenge, good challenge. You know, it's almost like that when I speak now. So it's a critical issue, and that's why I'm up here saying, got to build more housing. And that really starts at the local level, right? And making sure we've got, and on the construction side, the builders, everybody, you know, they want to build, but is it going to be in the right places? And how is that going to impact people? Because, yeah, you know, the communities are going to be impacted by Microsoft. Microsoft's being very thoughtful, honestly, from what I've heard and seen so far about the way they're going to build and try to build additional housing, which is unique. And I want to point out what Jim said. Employer-assisted housing. Now, if you know the long economic history of the United States, my grandmother grew up in a mill town no one's ever heard of in South Carolina called Newry. She grew up in employer-assisted housing. Factory homes, like Cabbagetown, where I bought my first in-town house, right? And that's the circle coming back. It's gotten so tough that the businesses are saying, all right, we've got to start to do this ourselves to meet the demand. I just want to acknowledge that. And so Buckhead, truthfully, Jim, Denise, the staff, the leaders of Livable Buckhead and the CID, they have been very forward-thinking and pushing us, truthfully, on funding these types of studies and funding them on their own to try to say we've got to meet this demand because you feel that pain so directly and what it means when these big companies come in, right?
I think the other clue to this is that we need transportation that's easy, and you know, it's like a lot of people are working from home. Why can't they work on a train or a bus with Wi-Fi, getting into their workplace and make it a wonderful experience? And then they can afford to live in these outer counties and get into their workplace in a pleasant manner.
Yeah, and our express bus system will be heavily used when we build the HOT, the managed lane system, which from a land use pattern standpoint is a good way to move people from those ex-urban areas into the employment centers, right? And it's, from the cost side, it's very cost efficient. It's not the same thing in the identity side of building heavy rail, but the costs are so much less. So we're working hard to make sure when that gets built, there's actually stations for those express buses and bus rapid transit buses to get off, to get to these employment centers, just like you said, in an efficient way, so that you can come in from Gwinnett and come into the centers in a way that's not backbreaking, right?
So, if you're going to...
Oh, no, I didn't know there was a reporter in the room. That is not an insult.
You're right, it's not. Thank you for saying that and correcting me. I don't even know why I said that. Sometimes people, that's interesting, real quick. Sometimes lately people have been very vehement against reporters, and it's not an insult. Thank you for saying that.
It's not.
All right. So if all the housing, like you showed on that graphic, is spreading out, and to your point, you have to connect it to the jobs. Is MARTA and transit, heavy rail, light rail, bus rapid transit, going to be the primary way to do that?
It's a combination, right? And that's why I mentioned the express buses. You know, Gwinnett has a system. Cobb has a system. Cobb's going to go up for vote, right, for a transit SPLOST, and that's a very specific thing under the law. We're really starting to see progress in Clayton County, which is really my heart for low middle income workers and commuting. So yeah, you got to look at the complete system that's not just MARTA, but MARTA is absolutely the bulk of it. You can't underestimate that. I forget what the numbers are on total ridership in the system, but it's well over 80%.
Right. That's what I wanted to ask. Ridership's been falling even before the pandemic. I think it's down 30% over about the past decade. So what's the disconnect there?
So what's been happening to incomes in the city?
Going up.
Yeah, yeah. And so you look at some of the trends, the bus service in particular in the city, and especially in some of the centers, you really have to be nuanced about understanding that ridership changes as incomes go up. You know, there's a couple points I make that are anecdotal. I live in Decatur. Sometimes I get up very early. And if you ever watch the train from Eastlake going at 5 in the morning, you'll see a lot of people that clearly by their attire are going to the airport and making a long commute, probably from Indian Springs to the airport. It is a critical service for those workers. Or if you're on East Ponce biking at 6 in the morning, you'll see the bus stops with people feeding into the system. So for low middle income workers, the ridership is strong, critical. MARTA did actually a great job of right-sizing the system during the pandemic to try to support them. And that's kind of the nuance. And Jim knows this. They're reevaluating those networks right now, literally to optimize them. But you know, a high-income worker is just less likely to ride a bus than a low-income worker that absolutely needs it. And it's important to remember that. That's a good thing.
And if I can say,
Yeah.
Doug, pre-pandemic, LBI sold over $1 million of passes to MARTA. And we have dropped 30% since then. But we were, I believe, their largest seller of passes. So it's coming back.
If you want the deck, this is that moment.
Pandemic did it.
Pull out your phone, aim the camera, don't take a picture, and it's going to give you a pop-up to download it. You have to send it to yourself because this is the big deck. You can have any fun you want to.
As well.
Yeah, and thank you.
Everyone,
Thank you.
Mike, thank you. Let's give a hand to Mike, and I'll have a few closing moments. Thank you. Everyone who is registered today will be sent this link next week. So you'll be able to have it, open it, or use Mike's code here. We'll ask you not to pass it around too much because we're going to put it out and try to sell it for people for a small fee who weren't able to attend today. That's okay. That's okay. No, the people here, we want them to have it. But once again, Mike doesn't disappoint with that. And it's a wonderful segue. A lot of the issues that were brought up, pricing, MARTA, we're working on all of those issues. We're working with our partners at the CID, Buckhead CID, ARC, Buckhead Coalition, to try to come up with solutions to all of those. Transportation, affordable housing, the Buckhead Redefined Plan identified a lot of the needs. So if you want to be a part of that, there is something on everyone's seat. Please consider joining Livable Buckhead and being a part of us and helping us. We bring this kind of information to the public all the time. We want to be the source that you can go to for information. So please think about joining us. Also keep in mind that today's a beautiful day, and it was about 11 years ago today we sat right here and introduced the first segment of Path 400 with the CID, DOT, ARC. So today would be a great day to get out on the path, take a little walk. And also, you've also got something, March 27th, we are having Party on the Path. We would say it was our annual, but COVID made it less so. Hopefully it will be an annual event. We'd love to have you all there, and it's just another opportunity to talk about all the things Livable Buckhead is doing. So with that in mind, thank you so much for being here today, and everyone have a great day. We'll look to see you here next year.